My quest to find the role and relevance of our national patron saints has revealed a surprising intensity of religious meaning. But one feature they all share is a shift from religious saint to nationalist icon. As the final chapter of my journey, I'm heading to Ireland in search of St. Patrick. Patrick is a man I can get a true sense and understanding of because he's the only one of our patron saints who actually wrote about his life.
I am Patrick. I am a sinner, the most unsophisticated of people, the least among all Christians, and to many the most contemptible. But even if I am imperfect in many things, I want my brothers and relatives to know the sort of man I am.
Patrick's writings include the Confessio, a confession. Patrick wrote down his life story of how he heard the calling of God, and he tells us of his association with Ireland, which is a real-life adventure story, and it begins in the middle of the Irish Sea. Patrick lived in the 5th century. His writings tell us he wasn't born in Ireland. He was a Roman Briton, born into the local nobility somewhere on the southwest coast of Britain. But Patrick was forced to journey across the Irish Sea, a journey that would change the course of his life.
Thomas, we're on the Irish Sea. How does he get to Ireland?
Patrick is kidnapped by people who come from Ireland across the sea. Slaves is a big business at the time, so, and particularly on the frontier, because slaves come out of war, and if people are fighting wars against each other, people who are captured tend to be sold into slavery, and it's slave raiders from Ireland who are doing it.
So why would they have taken Patrick?
He himself describes it as being one of thousands. He was just a young, healthy, would sell for a reasonable price.
Patrick's writings give us few clues to the actual place he was enslaved. Some historians today believe it could be County Mayo on the west coast near Killala, but according to popular tradition, it was on Slemish Mountain, an exposed hillside in County Antrim.
I was young, indeed almost a speechless boy when I was taken captive. And at that time I did not yet know what I ought to desire and what I ought to avoid.
He's captured, he's brought to the mountains to work as a slave. What does he do?
Well, there he's herding animals, which is a standard thing for slaves to do, out in all weathers, the rain, snow, frost. But the hardship of being a slave in these conditions made him, as it were, turn to the foundations of his faith in God. So he describes it as the love of God grew more and more in me as I was a slave. So he stayed a slave for 6 years, and then he has this vision in a dream telling him to escape and that he will succeed in escaping.
One night I heard a voice which said to me, "Well have you fasted. Very soon you are to travel to your homeland." Soon after I took flight, and I traveled in the power of God, who directed my path towards the good, and I feared nothing.
Patrick tells us after his escape, he walked for 200 miles and returned by boat to Britain, where he trained as a clergyman and later rose to become a bishop. One night he heard the voices of the Irish calling him back, and he returned to Ireland as a missionary on a quest to convert the Irish pagans.
How hard was it for Patrick to come back here and be successful?
I think it was very hard. I mean, he has opposition among those who think that he shouldn't be doing it, but also it's a very dangerous thing for him to do. And it's clear that at one stage he ended up in chains, and if one takes some later evidence about what that meant was possibly being on death row.
So what kind of person is he?
He is a passionate person, a person who's absolutely, he may be afraid very often, but nonetheless that doesn't prevent him sort of going in there and cutting a sort of dramatic figure.
Patrick said he journeyed to the outermost parts of Ireland, preaching and spreading the word of God, undeterred by the dangers of his missionary work.
It is proper to spread the name of God trustingly and without fear, so that even after my death I may leave something of value to the many thousands of people, my brothers and sons whom I have baptized in the name of the Lord.
I was getting a sense of a brave and strong man determined in God's work to spread the Christian faith. But why did Patrick feel the need to write down his life story in such detail, and why call it a confession? Patrick's Confessio forms part of the Book of Armagh, held at Trinity College, Dublin. Maybe this could hold the answer.
Tom, what's Patrick's message and what does it tell us about him as a person?
It tells us that he is someone who is very different to most Christians of his day. He was a very odd figure. Patrick thinks the world is going to end very soon. He believes that as soon as he's preached everywhere, then Jesus will come back. So he wants to hurry up Jesus coming back by preaching in the last places.
So Patrick is quite a fanatical character. Why does he decide to write this stuff down? Is there some kind of motivation?
Well, he had gone massively off message. All the other bishops realized that Patrick was off message, and he writes this to try and pretend that he is a normal Christian bishop and that what he is preaching is what every bishop should be preaching.
Does this prove Patrick existed?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, there's no question that Patrick existed. In fact, if you were going to invent a Patrick at a later date, you'd have invented one who was theologically sound. The very fact that this is such a bizarre document shows that it is the work of a living, breathing person who is justifying their position against other people.
The Book of Armagh also includes the writings of Muraku from the 7th century, who became one of Patrick's very own spin doctors. 200 years after his death, Muraku rewrote Patrick's life story to try and tone down the fundamentalist figure Patrick had become.
So Patrick is this fanatical figure preaching in the outermost parts of Ireland. And so how did they bring him back on message? How did the later writers make him orthodox?
The later writers wanted to have the idea of a single Irish family, a nation, a gens. This people had to be converted by a single apostle. So you need one single bishop. Patrick was the earliest bishop working in Ireland that someone in the 7th century could find out about. And also, it's the only record we have of someone who records preaching to pagans. So at the end of the 7th century, they need a single bishop who will be the apostle of the whole country, and they pick on Patrick.
So the first major reworking of the life of Patrick sanitizes his message.
Sanitizes it, makes him a standard Western bishop. Totally on message, someone who can preach to the whole island and become the apostolic father figure, patron figure for the whole people.
Muraku's rewrite of Patrick's Confessio worked. Patrick was recast as the bringer of Christianity to the whole of Ireland, despite the historical truth. And by the late 7th century, Patrick had no real competition for the position of patron saint. In the eyes of Armagh, their propaganda had worked. Patrick was recognized as the figurehead the nation needed, and legends of his missionary work grew.